Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Sukkah Daf Chav Zayin begins with a Mishnah. We begin with a Mishnah a few lines into the daf. And we're going to be discussing three opinions of Rabbi Eliezer against the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, how many meals you have to eat in the Sukkah, and are you obligated to eat them? Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is, can you make up a meal that you missed? And Rabbi Eliezer's opinion about, do you have to have just one Sukkah for the entire Yom Tov, or could you split it up amongst multiple Sukkahs? Related to that will also be the halacha that Rabbi Eliezer holds you should stay home the entire Sukkahs and you should not be traveling. So let's see the Mishnah. The daf begins with a Mishnah which introduces two machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. First one is, how many meals do you have to eat in the Sukkah? Are you obligated to eat in the Sukkah? Rabbi Eliezer says 14 meals. Sukkah is 7 days long, at least in Eretz Yisrael. You have to eat for each one a night meal and a day meal. The Chachamim say no, the only meal that's obligatory is the first night. After that, there's no obligations. You could eat whatever you want. Now, if you missed the meal, so Rabbi Eliezer says you could make it up on Shmini Atzeres. And the Chachamim say you can't make anything up. There's no way to make up a meal that was missed. The Chachamim only hold you have to eat the first meal in the Sukkah, but they also say it cannot be made up later. It's what we call ma'uvas lo yichaliskain, based on the pasuk in Koheles. It's a something that has been twisted and it cannot be straightened. Chisaron lo yichal himanos, something that's lacking cannot be filled in again. So the Gemara first discusses Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that you have to eat 14 meals. The Gemara says, what is the source of this opinion and what is the machlokes between the two of them? So the Gemara says it's about the pasuk which says, "B'sukkah teishu," you should live in the sukkah. We know teishu ke'ein teduru. We say you have to live in the sukkah just like you live in your house. Rabbi Eliezer says a person normally eats 2 meals a day in his house, one by night and one by day. And therefore, when he's sitting in the sukkah, he should do it just the way he would do it in his house. He should eat a night meal and a day meal, and therefore you have a total of 2 meals each day, 7 days, 14 meals. Say the Chachamim, no, you don't have to do that. You only have to do whatever you want. It is not obligatory. It is all optional. You can eat as many meals as you would like to eat, and just like it's optional in your house, it's optional here also. Says the Gemara, if that's so, how come the first night is considered obligatory? The Gemara says that you learn from a Pesach, both Sukkot and Pesach says Chamisha Asar, they're both on the 15th of the month, and therefore we learn some halachas from one to the other. Pesach, we know that the first meal is obligatory because the Torah says Ba'erev Teichel Matzos, you have to eat matzos Pesach night, the Seder night. And therefore, we learn it's obligatory to sit in the sukkah as well on the first night of Sukkot. Now, the Gemara does not explain why the rest of Pesach and Sukkot is optional. Rashi fills in. We learn from the fact that it says Atzeres Tiyolachem. That's a revelation on all 7 days that they are optional besides for the first night. Okay, that's the Gemara's first discussion. Now the Gemara goes to Rabbi Eliezer opinion that you can make up a meal that you missed. So the Gemara right away says, we don't understand this. What do you mean you can make up a meal that you missed? You could make up a meal on Shmini Atzeres? So the Gemara is bothered by how could you make up a meal on Shmini Atzeres? Now the entire back and forth that the Gemara is about to present, the question and the answer is Machlokes Rishonim. There's 3 or 4 different ways of understanding how it works. We'll go with Rashi as explained by the Marshal. The Gemara is bothered by that you cannot eat a meal in the Sukkah Shmini Atzeres. It's Bal Tosef to eat a meal in the Sukkah Shmini Atzeres. If you're not eating it in the Sukkah, so then you're not making anything up. So Gemara answers that Rabbi Eliezer changed his mind. He no longer holds that there are 14 obligatory meals. You don't have to eat a meal every day of Sukkot. Therefore, explains the Marshal, the obligation to eat a meal is not dependent on the Sukkah. It's not a Sukkah-based thing. It's just a Yom Tov-based thing. And therefore, you can make it up on Shmini Atzeres. It doesn't have to be eaten in the Sukkah to be made up. You can make up the meal even when there's no Sukkah around anymore. That's not a problem. So now the Gemara asks, well, how you can make up the meal? You have to eat your own meal on Shmini Atzeres. If you're just going to eat some bread, so it just looks like it's a Shmini Atzeres meal. How do you do anything to make up the meal? You're just doing Shmini Atzeres meal. And if you do 2 meals, one after the other, the Rishonim explain you can't because you have to wash and bench. You're not allowed to say Berachos and Mazon and wash right after that. And if you do it sometime later, it just looks like a regular meal that you're eating. It doesn't look like you're doing anything extra to make up for a meal that you missed. So the Gemara says you eat mini targima. Mini targima is also Machlokes Rishonim. What it means, it's not washing and having a meal, it's something else. It's either mizonos, or it's meat and fish, chicken, things like that, or it's fruits, nuts, and things like that. Number of opinions in halacha what mini targima are very relevant because shalshut is also supposed to be mini targima. Okay, now the Gemara has a conversation that took place between Rabbi Eliezer and the apotropos of Agrippas HaMelech. King Agrippas had a apotropos who was in charge of his house and his facilities and everything that he had. And he was from a person, he used to eat generally one meal a day. So he came and asked Rabbi Eliezer, I usually eat one meal a day. Do I have to eat 2 meals on Sukkot, or could I get away with eating just one meal? So he said, look, you fill yourself up with your one meal. You always l'chvoidcha. You have many types of appetizers and desserts and all kinds of things. So just add a little bit to your meal. Add some appetizers and desserts. According to Rashi, this means you should work up an appetite for 2 meals. If you could do it l'chvoid yourself, you could do it l'chvoid Hashem as part of the mitzvah of eating in the sukkah. Now, the Apotropos asked Rabbi Eliezer another question, and this is our introduction to the next topic that Rabbi Eliezer holds. Rabbi Eliezer holds, the Gemara says, that you have to sit in one sukkah the entire sukkah, so you cannot sit in multiple sukkahs. Only one sukkah. You can't change from sukkah to sukkah. So the Apotropos asked, what about me? I have 2 houses and 2 wives, one in Tverei and one in Sipari. I have 2 completely different families that I move from one to the other. Can I move from one to the other on sukkahs? So he said, no. He said you have to choose one, and that's where you'll stay for the entire sukkahs. You cannot switch from one to the other. If you leave one, you go to the other one, you lost the original one. The original, the part of the Yontif that you sat in the original sukkah is not counted towards the second part. So the Gemara chooses Machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer says you have to have one sukkah for the entire Yontif. And he also says you cannot build a new sukkah on Chol Hamoed simply because that sukkah of Chol Hamoed will not have been around, will not have been used for the first days. Now the Chachamim say you're allowed to go from sukkah to sukkah. You're allowed to build a sukkah on Chol Hamoed. Both of them agree that if your sukkah collapsed, you're allowed to rebuild it. So now the Gemara analyzes Machlokes and says, what's the source of this argument? This is based on the pasuk that says Chag HaSukkah is Tasa L'cha Shivas Yom. You should make sukkah 7 days. So Rabbi Eliezer says that means you should make a sukkah that lasts for 7 days. One sukkah should go for all 7 days. That's why you have to have just one sukkah. The Rabbanan say, no, that's not what it means. It means that all 7 days you're allowed to make a sukkah. If you don't have a sukkah, you're allowed to start at any point and make a sukkah. You didn't have a sukkah the first days, make a sukkah now. It's coming to tell you the opposite, that you can have a sukkah for whatever you have a sukkah. Not that you have to have one sukkah for all 7 days. Whenever you get one, you get one. Now the Gemara says, what's the chiddush that you're allowed to rebuild it if it fell down? For sure. I mean, if it fell down, why would anybody say not? So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you may think that when you rebuild, it's not counted as the same sukkah. You had one sukkah, collapsed. Now you're building a sukkah up again with the same piece of wood, but it's a new sukkah. And therefore you can't combine this and view it as if you're continuing the old sukkah. Kamash Malan know that this is still considered to be the same sukkah. Okay, now the Gemara brings in another machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. This is whether the sukkah has to belong to you. Says Rabbi Eliezer, just like the Torah says, L'chachtem l'chemia marishan. When it says the word, you should take for you, on the first day, you should take Priya Tzaddik Kapis Tamarim. You should take your lulav, and all 4 minim have to be yours. You cannot use a borrowed dalid minim, because the Torah says lochem, it has to be yours. Sukkah, it also says that it has to be yours. The phrasing is, Chag HaSukkos taseh lecha shivas yamim. Should make for you, you should make sukkah for you for 7 days. So it also has to be lecha. So the Chachamim say, no, lulav has to be yours, sukkah does not have to be yours. How do you know? Because the Torah says, Kol ha'ezach b'yisrael yeshu basukos. Basukos is spelled without vavs, which is therefore spelled basukas, which sounds like it's only one sukkah. And it says, Kol ha'ezach b'yisrael. All people of Yisrael consider one sukkah. Now, it's not possible for all people of Yisrael to own jointly one sukkah. There's not enough value in a sukkah to have everyone own a shava pruta, a minimum amount to be considered owning something. So therefore, it's got to be that if they're all going to sit in the same sukkah, they're sitting in a borrowed sukkah. And therefore, that shows that you're allowed to have a borrowed sukkah. Now, why does the Torah say lecha, taseh lecha? That's a teacher. You can't use a stolen sukkah. If you steal somebody's sukkah, you're not yaitza the mitzvah of sukkah. Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, how does he understand kol ha'ezach b'yisrael yeshu basukos? So he says kol is to include somebody who couldn't do the mitzvah the first days. He's still allowed to do the mitzvah the second days. Even though you have to have all 7 days as one mitzvah, and you have to sit in the sukkah in only one sukkah for all 7 days. Or if somebody became a ger on sukkahs, or if a child grew up and became over bar mitzvah, became an adult on sukkahs, he still has a mitzvah to sit in the sukkah the rest of the Yom Tov. Now, the Rabbanan don't have to find their source for that halacha because they don't hold of that halacha. They hold that it's pashut. Anybody can sit in any sukkahs. You can go from sukkah to sukkah as much as you want. There's no such halacha that it has to be all one sukkah, and therefore that's not an issue. Okay, now the Gemara brings a story or two that occurred with Rabbi Eliezer, which may show his opinion or also may seem to contradict his opinion, and we'll resolve it. So the first story is that Rabbi Eloi went on Sukkot to greet Rabbi Eliezer, was his Rebbe. Like we know, there's a mitzvah to go greet your Rebbe on a Yom Tov. And Rabbi Eliezer lived in Lud, and he traveled to there and he greeted him. And he said to him, Eloi, you're not from the Shoiv Haregel. You're not from the people who are resting in the house on Yom Tov, because Rabbi Eliezer holds you're supposed to stay in your house the entire Yom Tov. He said, I praise lazy people on Yom Tov, they're doing the right thing. Because they're supposed to stay home, like it says, V'samachta ato uvesachib, to stay home with your family and make your family happy. That's what the mitzvah of a regel is. Says the Gemara, is that true? Or Rabbi Yitzchak says a person is obligated to go greet his Rebbe on a Yom Tov. Like the Torah says that by the Isha Shunamis, when she went to Elisha Hanavi, her husband asked her, why are you going now? It's not Shabbos and it's not Rosh Chodesh, so why are you going now? That shows that on Shabbos and on Rosh Chodesh you do have a mitzvah to go. So there's a mitzvah to go on Rosh Chodesh, certainly a mitzvah to go on Yom Tov to greet one's Rebbe. So the Gemara says, so therefore the question is, how could Rabbi Eliezer say you're supposed to stay home if you're supposed to greet your Rebbe? So the Gemara says, not a kasha. Greet your Rebbe, that's in a situation where you could go and be back within the same days. You're allowed to travel during Sukkot, but you should be living at home. You should be coming home to roost every night. Okay, now the Gemara brings the rise with another story of Rabbi Eliezer. It says he spent his Sukkot in the upper Galil region in the Sukkah of Yochanan bar Rabbi Eloi. Yochanan, the son of Rabbi Eloi, in either Kesari or Kesarion, machlokes where that is, which one it is. And they were sitting there, and they sat in the sukkah, and the sun was shining in, and the sun was the sun was becoming hot, and Yochanan was afraid that Rabbi Eliezer was going to get a sunburn. So he said, "Am I allowed to spread a cloth over the sukkah to block the sun?" He wasn't asking Hilchos Sukkah, he was asking Hilchos Yom Tov or Shabbos. He was asking that it's considered to be Moisef al Ha'ol, adding on to a binyan, adding on to a structure, to a building on Yom Tov or Shabbos, which you're not allowed to do. So is this considered as a temporary structure, as a temporary addition? Is that a problem? So Rabbi Eliezer didn't want to answer him. So instead he changed the topic, as we've seen other places in Shas where he did that. So he said every Shevet in Klal Yisrael had a Shofet. There was at least one of the Shoftim came from every Shevet in the Klal Yisrael. Rashi goes through the list of most of them. He says that there are 4 that he doesn't know which Shevet they're from. Osniya, Yiftach, Shamgar, Yoyer, Avdain, that's 5. He doesn't know which Shevet they're from. He also doesn't know which Shvatim were from Shevet, which Shoftim were from Ruvain, Shimon, Gad, and Asher. That's the 4. But the other ones he lists specifically. Yeshua was from Ephraim, Ehud was from Binyamin, Gideon was from Menashe, Shimshon was from Dan, Barak was from Naphtali, Avtzon is Boaz, he was from Yehuda, Eli was from Levi, Tel was from Yisachar, Alon was from Zvulun. Okay. So the sun continued to creep up, and now it got to covering half of the sukkah, and it was becoming stronger, and the problem was increasing. So he asked him again, "Am I allowed to spread?" So he said there was no Shevet in Klal Yisrael that did not have a Navi, and Yehuda and Binyamin even had kings that the Nevi'im appointed. Well, the sun continued, and now was on Rabbi Eliezer's feet. So Yochanan went and he took the sheet and he put it on, because Rabbi Eliezer wasn't answering him. Now Rabbi Eliezer did hold that it was Asr, so he got up, put on his cloak, and he walked out. So the Gemara explains he wasn't trying to start up with him, he wasn't trying to be rude to him and not answer what he asked. His approach always was that he never said halachah he did not hear explicitly from his Rebbe. So the Gemara says, we have a question on this based on what we said earlier. What was he doing in somebody else's sukkah? Supposed to be home for sukkahs. He said that the person's supposed to stay home on Yom Tov. So the Gemara says it wasn't sukkahs. They were sitting in the sukkah, but it wasn't sukkahs. It was a different Yom Tov. It was a different Yom Tov. So whatever Yom Tov it was, he's supposed to stay home on Yom Tov. Meaning they were sitting in the sukkah, not else the mitzvah of sukkah. They were sitting in sukkah in a shed outside because they wanted to enjoy the air. So Gemara says it was Shabbos. Shabbos you're allowed to be away from home. It wasn't sukkahs, it was Shabbos. So the Gemara asks, why was it not obvious what he holds? Because we have a Mishnah where he says that a window shutter is only allowed to be put in the window where you're sticking it into the wall if it's clear that it's not a structure. It's not something you're building into the wall. even temporarily. It has to be that it's on a rope, it's hanging and not dragging on the floor. So you see that it's part of the wall. Its job is to function as a shutter that goes in and out of the wall, and you're not building anything. So you see clearly that he holds that it's also to temporarily build something into a building. So then it should be obvious that he holds you're not allowed to put the cloth over the sukkah. It's adding to a building. So the Gemara says, no, that's different. Over there, it seems like he's planning to leave it there. If it wouldn't be attached and hanging by the rope, he's filling in the hole, he's building it in permanently. Here, a cloth on top of a sukkah, he's definitely not leaving it there permanently. He needs his cloth, he needs his sheet, and therefore I wouldn't necessarily know that is usher just because he cannot plug the window hole with a shutter on.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.